Thank you, Lauren. Speaking in front of a crowd is among the top fears for the average person, but today we're meeting one man who has turned a childhood accident into a motivation for a life goal of inspiring others through his storytelling. We're talking today with North America's greatest speaker for some expert advice on the biggest 3 mistakes that people make when speaking in public. Joining us right now is Sean Smith. Sean, thank you for being here. Now, we mentioned that you were awarded North America's greatest speaker in 2013. You have to give us a little information about how one enters and how one wins that competition.
Yeah, it's a competition through an organization called the Women's Network, and thousands of people submit their videos online, and then there's a voting process, and we ended up going out and speaking on stage for 3 minutes, which is the hardest thing I'd ever done. And there's a voting. It's a competition, you know. It's like America's Got Talent. And for me, it was really about going for a dream, because I was one of those people that was always terrified to talk in front of anybody, really. But when I was 13 years old, you mentioned this accident. I was riding my bike to school, and I was run over by a car doing about 50 miles an hour. So I flipped over the car, and I blacked out somewhere in the air. And when I came to, I literally had cars coming at me, and they were getting bigger. I was in the slow lane. And I don't know how I got out of traffic, but I learned that we only get one shot, and we're never promised our next breath. So I made a vow to myself that if I ever have a dream, I'm going to go for it, because I never wanted to look back on life and say, what if? So I think that we have an obligation to go for our dreams, and speaking was just one of my dreams. And you mentioned that speaking for 3 minutes straight was one of the hardest things that you've ever done. Now, when we're talking about people that have to get up and speak in public, it can be a huge fear, even for people like myself who speak every single day. Sometimes you just kind of start getting tripped up, and it's hard to get that back into control. So what are 3 of the biggest mistakes that people make that maybe they should think about next time they do have to give up for a project lesson or a speech or anything quite like that? Anything. The first one I call the Judge Judy jail. And that's when people are so concerned about the judgments of their audience. They're too worried about the opinions. You know, if you imagine that people in your audience are like Judge Judy, and they got the scowls on their face, and they're just ready for you to mess up or to not be funny, so they can crack that whip and go, you're not good enough and you should stop speaking. When you're thinking about that in your mind, you're going to make yourself go crazy. All of us would. I do when I think about that. So speaking is not about seeking approval from others. It's really just about sharing your truth. And when you do that, the audience will love you. They won't judge you like you're afraid, and everything will be great. And now, the next mistake that people make quite often has to deal with how prepared they are to speak, correct? Yeah, it's the Dumb and Dumber disaster. And that's when people speak about something that they don't really have a lot of confidence and certainty in, but they try to be super intelligent and all intellectual and use the big 25-cent words. But secretly, they're afraid that somebody's going to ask them a question they can't answer. And so they create the feeling of, you know, being dumb. And the audience can tell. If you feel dumb, you start sounding dumb, and then this whole cycle happens, and you start feeling dumb and dumber, and it never works out well. All right, we have 1 minute left, so let's get to that third and final tip for people to think about before they get up and speak. We call this the Weekend at Bernie's blunder, and that's when speakers have no energy in their body. If you remember the movie Weekend at Bernie's, 2 kids keeping the dead guy and trying to pretend he's alive. A lot of speakers just show up and there's no animation in their body, and it's like there's just sounds coming out of a dead person, and it's creepy, number one, but it's not engaging. So when you speak, just have fun. You know, when I was competing for this award, I told a story about climbing up a mountain and going for your goals, but instead of just narrating the story, I became the story. And I was limping on stage and army crawling on stage, and at one point I said, if you want your goals bad enough, you got to bite your way to the top of the mountain. And I got down on my chest, and I went, ah, ah, ah. And it was silly, but it was fun, and people were engaged, and people will never forget the way you make them feel. Now, do you think this has to do that public speaking is just as much about storytelling as it is about speaking? That's one of the best ways to convey your message, is do it through stories. We can't not put ourselves in a story, and stories are easier for us to remember as a speaker. It's the best way to do it. And of course, there are so many more tips that you talk about in your speeches for people that want a little bit more information on how to have that confidence and make sure that they're doing everything right when they're public speaking. Where can they go for more information? Yeah, we have a lot of training videos and resources, 10 ways to create more confidence as a speaker at www.captivateyourcrowd.com. All right, thank you so much, Sean, for coming in and sharing your tips with us. Thanks for having me.